Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have all the latest on a 28-point plan which aims to end the war in Ukraine. We'll be asking who authored that plan and what does it say? We'll also be asking what's a suspected Russian spy ship doing on the edge of British waters? And what might the UK do about it? Plus, we'll be getting a wrap of all the top stories in the United States. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Sergei Markov, who is a former spokesperson to President Putin. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you here with us on Al Arabiya English. Can I just start by asking you, what is your understanding of this US drafted 28-point plan? What do you know about it?
This information and leaks which we could see about the plan with 28 points looks quite realistic, because first of all, it has some plan of the joint security for the both sides, because it's Russia insisting that not only Ukraine should have a security guarantee, but Russia also should have security guarantee. And among those security guarantee is some demilitarization of Ukraine. It's clear that this demilitarization of Ukraine, partial demilitarization of Ukraine, is part of this plan. It also was in Istanbul agreement of 2022. Also, it's realistically, it's resolved one of the main problem. It's aggressive de-Russification of Ukraine. I should remember that Ukraine was part of the Russia more than 1,000 years, and Kiev was capital of Russia during 3 centuries. Native language of 75 or 80% of the Ukrainian politicians, this is Russian language. This Russian language is prohibited by repressive Ukrainian regime. For what goal? It's clear goal to make anti-Russia from Ukraine. This prohibition of Russian language getting out, and Russian language should get official status. Also, one of the characteristics of the regime is political repression against Orthodox Church, which joined Russian and Ukrainian people. And it looks like this one of the points that political repression against Orthodox Church should be stopped.
Okay.
What I didn't see in those plans yet, it's guarantees of neutrality of Ukraine. Russia's suggestion very simple. It's based on the experience of the Austrian Republic. It means that neutrality should be part of constitution of Ukraine as in Austrian Republic, and neutrality should be a sign of big countries. First of all, constant members of Security Council, that they should respect security of Ukraine. And more generally, to say about security of Ukraine, I would say coming back to the situation before 2014 from term of political system of Ukraine. If you know, after 1991 until 2014, Ukraine has 0 problems with Russia. But just back to those time when Ukraine had no problem.
Okay, let's go back to talking about this 28-point plan. I mean, you're making it sound as though Russia is rather favorable to what we suspect is in that plan. Do you think that might be because it had Russian involvement in its drafting in the form of some help afforded to Steve Witkoff by Kirill Dmitriev? Is that your understanding?
As we understand, Steve Witkoff is a major author of those plans, and he wrote this plan himself for Donald Trump, and with taking account some of the positions of Russia and Ukraine. And of course, everybody who really want peace understands that Russian demand is very realistic, and demand from Ukrainian repressive neo-colonial regime is absolutely not realistic. So any peace plan to be realistic, has to be based on Russian decisions, suggestion, because it's very simple, that guarantee for the both of the sides, and democracy is one of the solutions. It's not those plans, but democracy for Ukraine is the main solution for Ukraine. When Ukraine was democratic country between 2014, before militant coup of 2014, Ukraine was absolutely in security. If Ukraine will be a repressive dictatorship with neo-Nazi in power, Jewish Zelensky neo-Nazi in power, Ukraine never will have any security from Russia, because Russia will have to cancel anti-Russian. If Ukraine will be constructed by anti-Russia, Russia will have to fight against it.
Well, so far, Russia hasn't defeated Ukraine. Ukraine is still there. So, I mean, you can make threats, but in fact, is Russia really able to deliver on them?
Look, today it was exchange of the bodies of the killed soldiers. Ukraine gave 30 bodies of Russian killed soldiers, and Russia gave 1,000 bodies of killed Ukrainian soldiers. During previous half of year, the proportion was the same. One killed Russian soldiers, and on the exchange to the 35 or 40 bodies of the killed Ukrainian soldiers. So it's a great tragedy. For us, it's tragedy, because for us, every Ukrainian soldier is Russian. He is Russian people. They're Russian. So for us, a civil war. It's what Vladimir Putin many times told. And but we have to go forward, because we regard that it's not war between Russia and Ukraine. It's war of the Western countries against Russia, who made Ukraine as neo-colonial regime, and they use these Ukrainians as slaves, and their Western war against Russia. It's our understanding. And frankly speaking, most of the Ukrainians believe the same. Most of the Ukrainians will be happy to have peace as soon as possible, under any conditions.
Under any conditions, you think? That's not what we've heard from any Ukrainians that we've spoken to.
Zelensky very much against this war, because
we haven't spoken to Zelensky.
Against any peace, because if peace happens, it will be presidential election. Vladimir Zelensky, who is hated by most of the Ukrainian politicians, for sure will lose his power, and then he will be under big threat because of high corruption, and because all Ukrainians believe that exactly Zelensky killed half of the millions of Ukrainians, because when he go to the election, he promised the peace, and he moved Ukraine to this tragic war. That's why Zelensky absolutely against any peace under any conditions.
President Zelensky didn't invade his own country. Russia invaded Ukraine, and that's how the war started, isn't it?
No. Western countries overthrown last democratic elected president Yanukovych 2014, imposed neo-colonial repressive regime, and those repressive regimes started terror against Orthodox Church, terror against Russian identity, Russian culture, Russian language, terror against those millions of Ukrainians who believe that Ukraine and Russia should be friends. So, and Russia sent troops to liberate Ukrainian people from terror of the neo-colonial, repressive, Russophobic, neo-Nazi regime. It's how we understand this war. It's liberation war. It's not aggressive war from a Russian point of view. This aggression from Western countries who make neo-colony from Ukraine.
Okay, that's your understanding. One of the things we've heard from the Kremlin is that any peace plan for Ukraine must address the root causes of the conflict. But seen from outside Russia, the root cause of the conflict is the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine. What do you say to that?
Well, Russia invaded to Ukraine because there are reasons of this war. Russia, you may know, Russia had a lot of problems because of the war. Great total sanctions. I am under sanctions of Canada, and thousands of Russian dead in this war. We have a lot of problems. Why? Because we are crazy? No, because there are reasons for Russia to send the troops to Ukraine. And these reasons, exactly the root of those war. These reasons should be resolved. And we know that party of war in Europe want to say, look, there are no reasons for war. Russians just crazy and decided to make aggression against Ukraine. But it's absolutely out of reality. It just did a direct lie of the party of war. Russia says, look, we sent our troops because we had specific problems which force us to send it. Let's resolve this problem. What kind of these problems? Political repression against Russian language, political repression against Orthodox Church, political repression against millions of Ukrainians who believe that Russia and Ukraine should be friendly, and Western plan to create anti-Russia on the territory of Ukraine and to have a relation between Russia and Ukraine as between Israel and Palestinians. We doesn't like such a relationship.
Mr. Markov, in your mind, has Russia made any concessions so far? Because some people have told us Russia hasn't made a single concession. And therefore, in Ukraine's position, why would they agree to a deal that was entirely one-sided?
Ukrainians, absolute majority, sure agree on any condition, even more tough condition. But nobody asks them because Ukraine is dictatorship. Zelensky will be against the peace under any condition because if peace happens, he will be under threat of the anti-corruption investigation and so on. So no position from another side except Western countries. About concessions, you know, if Russian city Kiev, Russian city Odessa, and Russian city Kharkov are not part of the Russia, it's already great concessions.
So you're basically saying the fact that you haven't entirely invaded and seized the entirety of Ukraine is what you would call a concession?
Of course, it's concessions that Russia is not taking traditional Russian historical territory and so on. Russia don't pretend on those territories which have been not part of the Russia during 1,000 years. It's Western Ukraine. It's 5 regions of Western Ukraine. Russia don't pretend so. If they doesn't like to be part of the Russia, let them live out of Russia. But as we know, absolute majority of people in Odessa, in Kharkov, they want to be part of the Russia. And if Russia agree that these people, millions of Russian people, millions of our people are not part of the Russia, it's already great concessions.
So if this 28-point plan is signed off on, why wouldn't Russia, therefore, according to your logic, do another invasion and take everything else that they don't get this time around? Do you think the plan is to take the whole of Ukraine eventually?
It's very easily. Ukraine, Russians are not happy that Ukraine became independent. But when it's appeared to be, Russian people accept this as a part of the reality. And Russians are ready to accept Ukraine as an independent democratic country, as Russia has no any plans of aggression against Russia from 1991 until 2014. So if Ukraine, just normal democratic country where Russian language is one of the official languages, Orthodox Church can freely, which have history of more than 1,000 years, it's not prohibited, no reason to go to send Russian troops. Russian troops have been sent only for crashing anti-Russian, which neo-colonial Western control anti-Russian. If there are no neo-colonial Western control anti-Russia on Ukrainian territory, no reason to send Russian troops. But if under the different tricks Western countries want to preserve repressive, terroristic, anti-Russian neo-Nazi regime, new war absolutely inevitable. That's why Putin talking many times. Let's resolve this problem that you, Western countries, you make neo-colonial, repressive, Russophobic regime. Let's change this, and the peace will come.
Okay, and just lastly, we're about to finish, but we're going to be speaking later in the program about the Russian vessel which has been spotted off the edge of British waters. The Yantar is the name of that ship. What's your understanding of what that ship's doing there?
My understanding is very clear. All these drones, vessels, which told that Russians, they sent by Ukrainian intelligence service, British intelligence service, Polish intelligence service, and another volunteers intelligence service of NATO country who want to have provocation and who belong to this party war. Russia has absolutely no reason to send something. Russia wants Europe to be more involved in Ukrainian war. No. Russia wants Europe to be distanced from those Ukrainian war. That's why I think all these cases, clear provocation from the intelligence service on mostly aggressive countries.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you for your time. Sergei Markov, former spokesperson for President Vladimir Putin. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Well, we're joined now by William Taylor, former US ambassador to Ukraine during the Bush and Obama administrations and former US Chargé d'Affaires to Ukraine under President Trump. Ambassador Taylor, always a pleasure having you on the program. First of all, I wanted to ask you about the senior Pentagon officials who are currently in Ukraine. The US Army Secretary Dan Driscoll leading a delegation, holding talks there. What's your understanding of what they're trying to achieve there?
Tom, the original purpose was to exchange views and get some information from the Ukrainians about how they're doing on the battlefield, in particular with drones. We have a lot, and the U.S. Army knows it's got a lot to learn from the Ukrainians about how to use drones, how to manufacture them, how to defend against drones. There's a lot that the Ukrainians have figured out that the U.S. Army wants to understand and adopt. But as you indicate, there's other things going on right now, and I'm sure the question about how to end this war will come up in those discussions.
Right, and one of the ways that we assume they're going to be talking about ending the war is by discussing this 28-point plan drawn up by Steve Witkoff, the US Special Envoy, but possibly with some help from a Russian envoy by the name of Kirill Dmitriev. Does that sound credible to you?
Very credible, sad to say. This does not, I think this is not a U.S. government position. It is not a U.S. government agreed document. It is a document that it clearly has all the Russian wish list. I mean, there's nothing on there that the Russians haven't asked for over and over in their maximalist demands. And that caused the U.S. government, the president and the Secretary of State, to cancel that proposed summit in Budapest a couple of weeks ago. So this is a non-starter for the Ukrainians. I think it's probably a non-starter for the Americans, and it's clearly a Witkoff-Dmitriev document.
And why hasn't Ukraine been involved in the drafting of that document up until now? And why have the European powers, do you think, all been apparently blindsided by it?
Because this is not the main channel. This is not the official U.S. work on this project. The official U.S. work on this project is under Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and it will have, and indeed already has had, input from the Ukrainians and from the Europeans. As I say, this document is not endorsed by the U.S. government, and so it didn't benefit from the normal process of talking to the Ukrainians and the Europeans. So that will come in when they get to a serious work, unlike this 28-point plan, which is not serious in my view. When they get to the serious work, the Ukrainians and the Europeans will have strong views.
So you're saying this 28-point plan doesn't really stand much of a chance? It
stands no chance. There is no chance. The Americans don't people that I've talked to in the U.S. government don't know about this and are surprised by it. The Ukrainians will reject it out of hand. They will be polite. The Ukrainians will say, very interesting, but look, here's a counter proposal. Here's a better idea. And the Europeans will never accept it as well. So no, it's not a real proposal.
Do you think there's an argument that perhaps they've brought this up now because Zelensky's looking vulnerable because there's been yet another corruption scandal in the ranks of his senior officials? Do you think that somehow weakened his hand with the US, and that's why they've decided to put this plan to him now?
Again, I don't think the Americans are putting this plan to him. I don't think this is a real plan from the United States. But you're absolutely right. The Russians love the fact that President Zelensky has this crisis, has this difficulty. President Zelensky is trying to get through that, and he is putting some pressure on his team to clean this up. But the Russians are going to make the most of this crisis.
Okay, I mean, there isn't anything that we've heard from the Russians that sounds like a concession. Have you spotted anything or heard anything that sounds remotely concession-like from them?
Not remotely concession-like, not remotely at all. This 28-point plan is very similar and almost identical to what Putin has been saying all along. That is, the Ukrainians can't have to cut their army in half. The Russian language, Russian Orthodox Church, no assistance from the Americans or the Europeans. This is a Russian wish list. This is not a serious proposal.
And, there could be an argument as well that, a proposal like this, if indeed it didn't bring about a lasting peace, would have the effect of encouraging Russia to perhaps look around for its next land grab. What do you say to that?
Again, the Ukrainians will never accept this. And sure, if the Russians somehow were to impose this, again, they won't be able to, but if hypothetically, yes, if they were able to take over Ukraine, then yes, the Baltic states, Moldova, even other members of NATO are in jeopardy. Moldova, of course, not a member of NATO yet, but the Baltic states are, and there are some other vulnerable nations that the Russians would threaten.
Ambassador Taylor, isn't Dan Driscoll going to have some quite tricky questions to answer when he gets back to Washington if he's been doing something that sounds like it's completely off-brand and totally outside of his remit?
Dan Driscoll's not. The Secretary of the Army is not. Witkoff, I think, is going to have some real problems when he goes back to Washington. Dan Driscoll is there as the Secretary of the Army with two very senior generals, and they are there, as I say, to talk about drones and talk about what the Ukrainians have learned about this new fight against the Russians. And you're right, he's going to have some hard questions, I'm sure, from the Ukrainians about this purported 28-point plan. And I imagine the Secretary of the Army, Dan Driscoll, is going to say, this is not a U.S. government proposal. Stand by for a real proposal. Okay,
so the idea is perhaps to just test the waters and see, how it goes down. Is that basically the idea?
I think that may give Witkoff too much credit. I think he is freelancing. I think he is, he probably didn't even leak this. It's probably the Russians that leaked this 28-point plan. Again, this is not a U.S. government position. This is Witkoff and Dmitriev having conversations about what Dmitriev and what Putin would like to see. This, again, we should not give any credibility to this 28-point plan.
Yeah, because what struck me when I was reading about this plan is that the Trump administration has encouraged and succeeded in getting NATO member states to commit to spending 5% of GDP on defense by the year 2035, and then to go appeasing Russia by giving it everything it wants when it invades not a NATO member state, but a border state and an allied state. It sends very conflicting messages, doesn't it?
Very conflicting messages, and therefore I think we have to discount this discordant message, this 28-point plan. But you're right, President Trump's put some serious sanctions on the Russians, the two largest oil companies. He put big sanctions on 2 weeks ago. It's already having an effect. He has also put secondary tariffs on the Indians for buying Russian oil. He's still thinking about whether or not to provide the Tomahawk weapons, long-range cruise missiles to the Ukrainians. So no, President Trump is still very hard on the Russians. There is strong support for Ukraine in the U.S. Congress. I mean, you've talked a lot, I'm sure, about the Graham bill with 85 co-sponsors that puts real serious sanctions on the Russians and purchases of Russian oil. So, yes, there's a strong support for Ukraine in the administration and here in Washington. And this 28-point plan is outside of that.
President Trump, as we all know, is a transactional president and he likes doing deals. And now that we're in a situation where European countries are the ones paying for the weaponry being sent to Ukraine, even if the origin of that weaponry is the United States. I mean, isn't that quite a good deal for the Americans, and perhaps one that's actually turning out to be quite a good money spinner, without meaning to sound crass?
It is a good deal. It is a good deal. President Trump gets to say to many people that he's not spending U.S. money, U.S. taxpayers' money anymore. He is allowing the Europeans and the Ukrainians to buy weapons from U.S. manufacturers. That's a good thing. And there's this $300 billion worth of Russian central bank reserves that can go to fund these purchases of U.S. weapons. So this is going in the right direction.
Okay, so if we have established that this 28-point plan is simply one man's work, but it doesn't represent the position of the US government, what's your view of what should be done next to somehow bring about an end to this war? Do you see the Ukrainians having to volunteer to make concessions of one kind or another, to give up land? What do you think is going to happen in the months ahead?
I don't see them having to make concessions. I do see President Trump using the leverage that he's got over Putin to bring him to the conclusion that he cannot win. Putin is going to come to the realization that the economic pressure, the sanctions, the tariffs on purchasers of Russian oil, the provision of $300 billion to the Ukrainians to keep them going for the next 3 years, the weapons that are going to continue to flow to Ukraine, that is what's going to put pressure on Putin to say, I can't win this one. I'm going to have to get out of this somehow and stop the fight. That's what's going to have to happen. And then, yes, they'll probably freeze along the current line. The Russians will continue to illegally occupy 19% of Ukraine, but the 81% of Ukraine is not occupied will go to the EU. And the Ukrainians will say they'll get back that last 19%, the 19% that the Russians clearly continually occupy, illegally occupy, that will come back, just like West Germany never gave up on getting back East Germany, and they eventually got it.
One of our earlier guests, we spoke to Dmitry Markov, Sergei Markov, I should say, who is a former spokesperson for President Putin. And he said to us that all Ukrainians actually wanted to be part of Russia and that they viewed President Zelensky as being a dictator, a Nazi, and he used many other descriptions. When you were based there, did you hear many Ukrainians expressing their desire to be part of Russia?
That is, no, of course not. Of course not. What the Russians have done is create a unified, hostile nation on their border. When they invaded in 2014, and then when they invaded again in 2022, big time, that consolidated the Ukrainians against the Russians, and that hatred and that hostility for Russia will persist for generations. Putin has made a major mistake, and that fantastical thinking that you heard from them, that's what made Putin make this mistake to invade, this blunder to invade. This is the biggest mistake he's ever made, he could have made, and that's because he thought that the Ukrainians really wanted to be Russians. That couldn't be farther from the truth, could not be farther from the truth.
So you never heard one Ukrainian say to you, I'd actually rather be Russian?
Nope, never had.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Thank you very much indeed. William Taylor, former US ambassador to Ukraine. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Tom.
Meanwhile, the British Defence Minister says that military options are ready in the event that a Russian vessel spotted on the edge of British waters becomes a threat. Well, the vessel, called the Yantar, was spotted earlier on this month and is believed to be used for gathering intelligence and mapping undersea cables. Well, let's get more on this, and we can speak now to Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, former NATO commander. Dr. Parry, thank you very much for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya English. What's your understanding of what the Yantar is doing on the edge of British waters?
Well, the Yantar is becoming a familiar visitor to shores off Britain. It's a specialist intelligence vessel. It's highly capable surveillance platform which can look at the seabed, it can analyze, it can map, it can also put little drones down to actually look at what's going on the bottom. It's also hoovering up all sorts of electronic emissions. It can intercept signals intelligence, communications, things like that. And so if you've got a radar operating, for example, then it'll pick up all the characteristics of that radar. It'll listen to mobile phone calls. It'll listen to all sorts of unguarded communications. It's a prime intelligence resource, and we've known it for a long time.
Our earlier guests seem to be suggesting that it might not actually be a Russian vessel. I mean, I should add that he is a former spokesperson for President Putin. Does that sound credible to you?
No, not really. I mean, he may be playing with words here. It may be a Russian contractor or something like that, but there's no doubt that the beneficiary is the Russian state and the Russian military. There's no question about that. So whether it's flying different colors or a Russian flag is almost irrelevant. It's working for the Russians, and that's it.
How seriously is the British government taking this ship's presence?
I would say rather too seriously, to tell you the truth, Tom. It's something we've been used to during the Cold War. As I said, the Yantar has been a frequent visitor in the past. We know what it's doing. We know where it is. We even know what it's looking at. And I think there's been a bit of an overreaction, dare I say it, from the British government. We should actually just ignore it and pretend that actually it isn't doing anything to us at all. But I'm afraid there's an internal agenda that is playing in Britain right now to, I'm afraid, overstate the case. But frankly, it's normal business, to tell you the truth, to see off anything that's coming near our waters. In fact, Tom, the Yantar or any other vessel is allowed under the rights of innocent passage to steam right through our territorial seas, or indeed any country's territorial seas, or indeed their economic zone as well. So they're perfectly within their rights to be anywhere they want, as long as they're not conducting any sort of military activity and don't divert from the route that they're taking.
When you hear the British Defence Minister, John Healey, saying that military options are ready should that ship, the Yantar, become a threat, what do you think he's got in mind?
Well, I really don't know. I don't see how the Yantar, which essentially is an unarmed vessel, can become a threat. What we have heard is there's a possibility that the crew of the Yantar have been using lasers to either dazzle or blind the crew of the aircraft that are doing the surveillance. Now, this has happened a lot of times before with the Russians. The Chinese have done it off Djibouti to American aircraft. In fact, when I was flying in the Gulf during the Iran-Iraq war, the Iranians were using similar devices to try and blind and dazzle pilots flying aircraft like mine. In fact, we used to fly with eye patches on one eye to make sure that we weren't blinded by these things and obviously not being able to fly the aircraft.
Have the sightings of Russian vessels and submarines and such like in British waters become more regular occurrences?
Well, we're seeing a lot of interference, certainly on the cyber front. We've had over 99,000 cyber attacks that are associated with Russia or Russia proxies. We're seeing all sorts of odd activity in relation to GPS jamming. Our friends on the continent have had drones flying in their airspace. They've had jamming as well. If we found a submarine inside our territorial seas, there's actually an act of war, Tom. You're not allowed to submerge submarines within another country's territorial seas. So that would be something we take very seriously indeed. We know they're around. We know the submarines try and get into our territorial seas. They try and track our ballistic missile submarines. It's frankly a big echo from the Cold War. Russia, sees Britain as its number one opponent in Europe because of Britain's support for Ukraine and the fact that we're supplying them with weapons and also finances as well. And essentially they're saying, we don't like you very much and we're going to sort of tweak you around the edges. We're going to sort of poke you here and there and show you that we're not very happy.
I mean, the Prime Minister of the UK, Sir Keir Starmer, pledging big increases in expenditure on military spending in the face of threats, and he's cited Russia, but not only China and Iran have also been cited. But with a massive shortfall, by the sounds of things, in the British finances, I mean, aren't there questions being asked about how on earth he's going to fund that?
Yeah, but on the other hand, Tom, it's a good point. The prime duty of government is to protect the country and its population from attack and also threats of coercion as well. If you ask the citizens of Ukraine what their top priority is right now, it's the defense of their country. And frankly, if governments aren't able to prioritize this sort of thing, then quite a lot of other things are going to go by the board as well. You're not going to be able to make choices about education, welfare, infrastructure or anything if you don't feel safe and you're subject to coercion. So frankly, our governments have got to put their money where their mouth is. They've also got to accelerate this rearmament to make sure that potential enemies, and it is, I always say that Russia for Europe is bad weather, but China is climate change, then we actually have to be in a position to say, look, if you come near us, we have the ways in which to deter you. If we don't deter, we'll find ourselves very rapidly subject to coercion and possibly conflict and war.
Since you just mentioned Ukraine, I wondered whether you'd read about the 28-point plan drafted by the United States, but possibly with Russian involvement, with the goal of ending the war in Ukraine. Just first of all, I mean, what do you make of that plan and what you've read about it? Does it sound to you like a workable solution to end the war?
Well, I think it's a basis for discussion, but it's not a basis for a lasting peace at all. It gives Russia breathing space. It gives them far too much strategic control of vital Ukrainian territory. And frankly, it looks like the springboard for another assault in future because, just give you an example, Russia wants the Donbass. That will give Russia quite significant amounts of strategic minerals. It also gives a huge fortress belt, which they've been trying to capture for the last 2 years. And it's cost them up to 400,000 casualties in doing that. We reckon it will cost another 500,000 if they captured it militarily. There's no indication that the other provinces that have been captured by Russia will be returned to Ukraine. So that doesn't appear anywhere. So, for example, is Russia going to give Crimea back to Ukraine? I don't think so. My own belief has always been throughout this war that Russia's agenda is to capture the whole bottom third of Ukraine all the way across to Odessa. That will cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. It'll allow Russia to dominate the Black Sea and, of course, leave a rump state that is barely sustainable economically up into the north and west. So looking at it as I do, I think it makes Ukraine wide open to a re-attack. I think the guarantees that are in there, which include the US getting involved if there's any breach, frankly not credible, because what Russia will do, it won't invade, it'll just destabilize any border that is established, and you'll see all sorts of little green men appearing, and of course nothing will be big enough to cue the United States getting involved in a war is what for them a very far off place. So every single thing I see in that 28-point plan has a but associated with it. And that but leads, frankly, to Russia being a winning power and Ukraine being a defeated power. And it's got to be balanced up a bit. I did think initially it was a bit like the arrangement that Finland had with Russia, with the Soviet Union, in the Winter War of 39-40, which basically traded land for neutrality and also peace. It doesn't look a bit like that. It looks like an abject surrender, and it gives Russia the chance to come back again when it's drawn its breath again.
And what we're hearing from European leaders, and let's be clear, European countries are in fact buying and supplying the weaponry to Ukraine right now. They're buying it from the United States, but paying for it themselves. But what we're hearing from them is that they've basically been rather blindsided by these discussions to draw up that plan. Do you find that slightly surprising?
No, I don't, Tom, actually, because people haven't really noticed that the world has changed. And I always refer people to a thing called the Melian Dialogue, which occurred in the war between Athens and Sparta, the Peloponnesian War in the 5th century before the Christian era. And this island of Melos said, look, we're not interested in being on one side or the other. We'd like to remain neutral, please. And Athens said, you really don't get it, do you? That's only a discussion for countries that are equal in power. For people like you, what you have to understand is the strong do what they want and the weak do what they must. And I'm afraid to say we're back in the world of great power competition, and great powers like Russia, China, and also America are going to do what they need for their own interests, and the rest of us are going to have to find out where our interests are best placed. And that goes for medium powers like Saudi Arabia and all the other ones in the Middle East as well.
So just to sort of wrap up, I mean, the way you look at that plan is that it's one-sided. Again, we haven't heard a single concession from Russia, although my earlier guest said that a Russian concession had been the fact that Russia hadn't invaded and seized the whole of Ukraine. That was his answer to my question. But you're basically saying it looks like something of a gift to the Russians.
Well, I think it gives the Russians, as I said, breathing space. They can come back again anytime they like. I don't think the guarantees are in place. And I'm afraid every time I hear any spokesman that comes out of the Kremlin or has any association with it, I automatically assume they're trying to deceive us or they're lying.
And I mean, without the buy-in from Ukraine and the buy-in from European leaders, does the plan even stand a chance?
If it can be brokered between America and Russia and there are sufficient guarantees in place, they can enforce this. At the end of the day, most of the weapons and most of the financing comes through America. They can put this through. I'm afraid to say that if Europe wants to have a bigger say in these things, they have to actually rearm. They have to actually put together their own defenses and say to Russia, we will defy you. My worry, Tom, is that if we do get a ceasefire in Ukraine on any terms, President Putin will turn his attention to the Baltic region, because that's another area that the Russians are very sensitive about, as well as the Black Sea. And he'll put pressure on Finland and Sweden for daring to join NATO during the recent crisis. And we'll find that the Russians are then pressing on that area of the Baltic as well. So in many ways, it's good that he's fly-papered in Ukraine right now, because it keeps the rest of Europe safe while it rearms and actually gets its head round the fact that we have a serious aggressor to the east of us.
Okay, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, thank you very much indeed for your time, sir. Now, it is Thursday, and as ever on this day of the week, we take a look at the top stories making headlines in the United States. And I'm pleased to say we are joined from Washington by Amanda Mackey, who is there standing by for us. We're also joined from Miami by Angie Wong, both Republican strategists and friends of the show. Great to have you both with us. Lots to get through today. So let's start by talking about the visit to Washington by Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman earlier this week. That visit included all the trappings of a state visit. It came about 6 months after President Trump's visit to Riyadh, which was, of course, his first planned overseas trip since taking office. I mean, lots of deals were announced. Amanda, let me start by asking you, what were the big headlines that stood out for you from that visit?
Well, obviously, when President Trump was there in May, the commitment was $600 billion, and that was up to $1 trillion. So, certainly the red carpet treatment, and it was technically not a state visit, but certainly treated and perceived as such. And I think that that's become President Trump's MO, is to roll out the red carpet, really show a lavish time, and get the commitments that he believes is best for America and Americans. And so I think that that's what we saw on display yesterday when the reporter lunged at MBS about Khashoggi and the death of Chargé. Obviously, President Trump came in as, to save him and to say, we don't need to do that. That's disrespectful when, someone's been invited. You don't need to ask those questions. And so definitely trying to pivot from that and create, hopefully, I think, in the end, an accord, the Abraham Accords, where Saudi Arabia would be part of it. Of course, Saudi Arabia wants a two-state solution, which is a no-go for Israel, but certainly something that they've made clear, and President Trump would really like to see the expansion of the Abraham Accords.
Angie, let me turn to you. I mean, would you say that visit was overall a success? And what stood out for you in terms of headlines?
Oh, absolutely. That was a very, very successful visit. Look, it's clear for Trump, Saudi Arabia is valued. He's a very, very valued partner for the Trump administration. And Trump wanted MBS to leave Washington happy, which I think he did. Both men came away with the deals that they wanted to. Saudi Arabia left with F-35s, although not the full package of the exported. He got the exported version of our F-35s. But also, Trump understands that we're heading into the midterm elections here, and he wanted to bring oil stability to the U.S. so that we can have affordability. That's our favorite word these days here in the U.S. to talk about during our midterm elections, and also to bring on carbon, AI, and other tech giants into the fold here, because we saw Elon Musk was there at the dinner, and other tech leaders were as well. So I think both men walked away with what they wanted. Clearly, it showed the optics of normalization. This was the first state visit, even though it wasn't an official state visit, in about 7 years. So this was a great optics. It certainly signaled to the world this is a valued partner and our new alliance.
Yeah, and Amanda, I just wanted to ask you, I mean, some of the deals that came out of that visit, including deals about AI chips and so on, I mean, they reflect a really high level of trust, don't they, between Washington and Riyadh?
They do. And I think that you're basically seeing the 21st century version of oil become energy, defense, and AI. I mean, that's really where these two meetings of the minds were for the two nations. It's just so interesting because petroleum is certainly part of it. I think we have largely leveled that off in the United States, where secure gas prices are at their lowest they've certainly been in, I believe, 5 or 6 years. But the point is how important energy and AI is in this relationship. And it's something that President Trump and MBS discussed and were working in furtherance of. And that's an excellent thing. That's what we want to see, because that is the new 21st century version of what we were doing in the 70s and 80s with countries like Saudi Arabia that are oil rich.
And just before we move on to our next topic, I mean, President Trump said he's going to start working on resolving the war in Sudan. I know he's working on resolving quite a lot of wars at the moment, and that, it's understood, came directly as a request from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And the conflict there has killed 150,000 people or more. What might President Trump do to end the conflict? Any thoughts, Angie?
Well, President Trump is certainly reviewing it, although I don't think that is on the top of the agenda at the moment. I know the Secretary of State has been kept very busy looking at this. I think President Trump wants to have some sort of footprint there, although he would never commit any U.S. troops on the ground there. I think that he would like the regional leaders to work it out. He's the deal president, right? So I'm sure there are things that can be offered to these sides to end this conflict. But, there's been so much going on at the State Department that I can't imagine that this is going to be resolved anytime soon. Certainly not by the end of this year, although, there are many, many things on the wish list that I'm sure that, were not fulfilled just yet. But, it's certainly in the pipeline, and anything can happen with this administration.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic. On Wednesday, President Trump signed legislation ordering the Justice Department to release all files on Jeffrey Epstein. This dossier comprises all the files and communications relating to Epstein, as well as information about the investigation into his death back in 2019. So all of this is going to enter the public domain in 30 days from now. Amanda, isn't this a bit of a U-turn by President Trump?
No, I think President Trump said all along that he had nothing to do with this. And really, if the information was released, it would backlash on the Democrats, which I think we've been seeing that at least with Larry Summers, the former president of Harvard, and someone who has very high level positions that he's had to vacate from, such as being on the board of OpenAI. And so, this cuts both ways. And President Trump has made it abundantly clear he had nothing to do with this man. He started taking away his staff, and that was when Trump cut off the relationship. And so I think really what this is going to do is hurt Democrats more, and I think you're going to see that. But the reality is that this was a big deal for Republicans and Democrats. And no one wants to see the veiling or cloaking of information like this. Now, the Republicans' argument was, privacy, keeping the victims private. But, ultimately, this became a bigger issue that people began to focus on and wanted to have the files released. People within the MAGA world and President Trump's own party said this is what we voted for. And so the information in 30 days, with some caveats, will be released.
Yeah, Angie, I mean, clearly the Epstein brand is a radioactive brand. And as Amanda was just saying there, I mean, it's potentially got consequences for both parties. I mean, what do we think are in these files? I mean, and do we think that what comes out is finally going to put a stop and put to bed all of the conspiracy theories that have been circulating for not just months, but years now?
I don't think the conspiracy theories will ever end. I think people have lots of thoughts on this, and it will never really, truly be put to bed. But I'm very happy to see full transparency by the Trump administration and the DOJ. Tom, it wasn't that long ago that you and I were discussing how President Trump ordered the DOJ to release all these files. So I'm not sure why, the media now is calling it an about face on Trump's decision to release these files. There is one caveat to note. Although the DOJ now has 30 days to release the Epstein files, what are these files exactly? Well, they're millions of pages of documents anyone can submit through, say, the FBI website and write Epstein on it, and that would appear on top of the pile. So you have to understand there's so much there. But I think the most important thing to note when we do finally see these files would be that there are also classified files and also files that belong in various courts in the U.S. at the moment that may not come out, certainly not the classified documents. So, there are some room to conceal, if you want to call it that, still. But at the end of the day, what has Trump done? Well, he's basically chased the Democrats into a box to say, we want to see the files. We want to see the files. Okay, let's see the files. And then the dripping of emails that have come out since have been about Hakeem Jeffries and various members of the Democrat Party being involved with Epstein on some level. So I think this may be an embarrassment for the Democrats when it does come out, likely the beginning of next year. This might be a classic play by Trump.
Okay, well, one of the loudest voices calling for those files to be released was Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she seems to have slightly broken rank from her party on a couple of issues. She called the situation in Gaza a genocide. She's been critical of the current administration for not focusing on kitchen table issues, particularly rising prices, affordability, as we were saying earlier on. Amanda, how serious is this infighting, would you say, in the ranks of MAGA got to?
Well, if we look back to earlier this year, we saw a similar sparring between President Trump and Elon Musk, and now we see them reunited. So it's hard to say because, in Washington, it's a tough thing. You need people to be able to support your agenda. And so, sure, you can say Marjorie Taylor Greene is bad, but she hasn't said that about him. She has said, what has happened to me as a result of President Trump going after me has hurt me, but I still support the president. Now, some of the people will say that you haven't been supportive of President Trump, and in fact, you've tried to thwart him at all costs. And so you can't consider yourself MAGA. And so I think that's really where the issue lies right now. But I do believe there will be a truce. And I do believe that someone that was so supportive of President Trump and continues to support President Trump just wants to inject some issues that she believes are important for the conversation. And perhaps President Trump will take up those issues. Again, you mentioned the affordability issue as it pertains to health care, which personally affected her children.
Okay, thanks for that, Amanda. Angie, just turning to you. I mean, President Trump has called Marjorie Taylor Greene a traitor, withdrawn his endorsement of her. I mean, does this look to you like a full-blown feud, or are you optimistic they'll eventually sort of make up, as Elon Musk and President Trump appear to have done? And is anyone else involved? Is this beyond Marjorie Taylor Greene? Is this mushrooming?
Tom, this is the biggest MAGA divorce I've ever seen. And certainly these are two juggernauts of our world here. So it's been quite the story to see these two fighting, because remember, Marjorie Taylor Greene was by President Trump's side all the way leading up to the 2024 election, spent millions of her own dollars to get him elected, and traveled with him and campaigned and was a surrogate for his campaign. So, you know, at the end of the day, what does she get out of it? And I think that's where this all leads back to. She did not get rewarded for what she had done to help him get reelected, as with other Republican members. Meanwhile, the Trump team has told Republican House members to stay put in Congress, because why? President Trump wants a full 4-year presidency. He does not want any hiccups during the midterm. So he's asked House members, remain where you are. Do not seek higher offices. We saw that in the case of Elise Stefanik when she tried to go into the UN role, and Trump yanked her out to keep her in Congress, to keep the numbers just enough so that we can pass a couple of bills in Congress. So Marjorie Taylor Greene wanted something for her efforts in helping President Trump get reelected. And because I think she didn't receive anything, she's now doing this kind of tit for tat with him. You know, you mentioned traitor and other things, words flying around. The other thing that Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she was so close to Trump, also said was that he was inciting violence on her. You know, what do those words bring up? Oh, January 6th all over again. So they know how to play each other. I agree with Amanda. I think it's healthy to have these debates. I think it's healthy not to be a Trump absolutist and push back if President Trump is not doing something right. And these are healthy debates to have. Now, you know, again, I would like to be as hopeful as Amanda and say, yes, those two will reconcile, but I don't know. They're both very ambitious people. So I'm looking forward to see how this one ends.
Yeah, I mean, Amanda, you're not worried at all about a feud and a split, fractures within the ranks of MAGA with the midterms looming not so far in the future.
Yeah, well, the midterms are a year away, and certainly we have time to, you know, get the family back together and, you know, kind of stop this hemorrhaging between the two. But really, this ultimately is about, like I said, Marjorie Taylor Greene had her issues, things that she represents her district on, and things that she's hearing from her constituents. And so if she's channeling that, and, you know, certainly President Trump didn't appreciate that, well, you know, here we are. So time will pass, and hopefully this will be something that is just, you know, they move on from this. But we saw it with Elon Musk, and hopefully we'll see it with Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Well, President Trump, just moving on to our last topic, and we'll have to be super quick on this one. President Trump might have a new friend, because he's got a visitor at the White House on Friday, who is, of course, the New York City Mayor-elect Zoran Mamdani. Angie, how did this meeting come about?
I like this approach. I think this is exactly how a president should behave, along with a new mayor-elect. You know, this is good. The two men are talking. Clearly, President Trump and his family have business ties to New York. President is from New York, and he wants to see his city thrive. He does not want to pick a fight with Zoran Mamdani like they had during the campaign. But look, he is now mayor-elect, and they have to work together. So why not have an open line of communications? President Trump did exactly the same thing with the San Francisco mayor, Daniel Lurie, and they have a great relationship. So this is a new page for President Trump. He's usually kind of more brash and aggressive. This one is like inviting him for tea at the White House. I prefer this.
Amanda, your thoughts just before we wrap up.
This is a good thing. New York City is very important to President Trump. And I think at the end of the day, President Trump will probably want to make sure that NYPD and law enforcement is protected in New York City, and make sure he gets a commitment on that. That's what I believe.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed to you both, Amanda Mackie. Thank you. And thank you as well to Angie Wong. Great to have you both with us today.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for a look back at some of the best interviews of the week. Until then, goodbye.